Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. This is the second episode in our I Can Do That with Dialog Tech series. Today we're going to be talking about how you can get more data and insights from your calls with Dialog Tech SourceTrak. So just before we get started, I want to let everyone know that we will be sending out a follow-up email with the recording of today's webinar so you can view it all over again. And if you have any questions throughout, we're going to be getting into some rather technical things in some spots about SourceTrak. So if you have any questions throughout, please feel free to submit those questions via the chat box, and we'll get started. My name is Catherine Buchholz, and I'm the Content Marketing Manager here at Dialog Tech. And today I'm joined with Nick Deal, who is the team lead for our solutions consultants. So I'm going to kind of just cover really quick, high level, why we care about calls and do a little primer on call attribution and SourceTrak before handing it off to Nick, who will dive into 6 ways that you can use SourceTrak that you might not know. So why do we care about calls? I just want to take a few minutes to reinforce this fact. So you might already be aware of calls and be tracking them. And if you're not, this will be a good high-level overview of the value of calls. And it really is twofold. So first and foremost, there are just still certain types of conversations, or certain types of purchases, that we make that require a call, and they require a conversation. These are often high-value, considered, complex purchases. We see this a lot in our business with insurance, automotive, travel, healthcare, even local. And they're just purchases that need to have a conversation. The other factor is really this click-to-call revolution that we are experiencing. So traditionally with online marketing, marketers look to drive conversions via form fill. We're very used to that. It's very common, but that's really great for desktop or laptop computers when people are engaging with web forms in that capacity. But we're now spending over half of our digital media time on our mobile devices. So what happens when you encounter that form fill on your smartphone? It's just not as much of a natural or particularly easy conversion for consumers to make via a smartphone. It can be very clunky. It can be kind of frustrating to have to fill out so many forms in such a small space. And not to mention that you have to wait for a response, which you have to do regardless of it anyway. So there are just situations where you want that immediate conversation or immediate answer to your question. So what if you were able to click to call? And this is that revolution. So tapping on a click to call link is easier, it's faster than filling out a web form on a smartphone. And really, honestly, it comes down to click to call at the core is all about catering to the mobile consumer experience. And we're seeing this technology being used on mobile websites, on landing pages, and you even see search engines acknowledging the fact that consumers want to call from their smartphones through continuous enhancements. So we see it with the call extensions you can use and add to your search ads. There are now call-only ads that run on smartphones. And we also see it with the fact that you can include call buttons in your local listings. So with this click-to-call revolution, what are we seeing now? We're seeing U.S. businesses getting more calls from digital marketing than ever before. In 2014, it was 76 billion calls. In 2019, it will be 162 billion calls. That's over 100% growth in 5-6 years. So we're not just seeing it on one channel. We're seeing it across every single type of channel. Search ads, we're seeing it come from Facebook and social ads. We're seeing it come from display ads. Phone calls are not going away, and they're playing an increasingly important role in the customer journey. And you can see here that it's important for consumers to be able to call at every stage of the customer journey, all the way from inspiration through to post-purchase support questions that they might have. And you can especially see here that the research and purchase phases are very important in this process to be able to call. And the reality here is that it's really going to vary by industry, right? So if you're trying to buy a car, you're most likely going to go to the dealership to buy the car on the lot, but you may have a lot of questions to be answered. Maybe you're looking for inventory, or you have a pricing question. You want to comparison shop a little bit between dealers, so you're going to call before you have to commit to going there and making that purchase. Or let's say it's the insurance industry, and I had this experience recently with buying a mortgage. You have a lot of questions. It's a complex purchase. I did a lot of research online, but then when I went to purchase, I had my questions answered via a phone call, and I completed my purchase over the phone. So the reality here is that it really just varies by industry where calls are most important. And so these consumers who are calling to research and to purchase are actually driving revenue. Calls convert to revenue 10 to 15 times more than web leads. And in 2016, calls influenced $1 trillion in U.S. consumer spending. So this information here just really reinforces that calls are a valuable conversion type that marketers must account for and in order to be able to use to optimize their marketing then. So that's why we care about calls, and we can kind of understand the true value of calls. And now I'm just going to kind of touch on why we want to include calls in our marketing attribution overall and the value of doing that. First and foremost, you're going to solve a black hole in your attribution. You may not even know that you have this black hole in your attribution, but it's there, and you're going to solve it by being able to track and optimize the entire customer omnichannel journey. And we see this being thrown around a lot, omnichannel. It's very, very important. I mean, there are so many different touch points that we make in our path to purchase. We interact with a number of different marketing channels on a number of different devices, and being able to account for every single one of those touch points, including offline conversions, which could be a phone call, obviously, or even an in-store visit, that's very, very important to be able to account for all of those touch points. And when you're able to do that, your CPA will actually become much better than you think. You may not be aware of this, but your CPA, you're missing some of those conversion types, it's going to be a lot higher, right? So you're finally able to measure your true CPA. And that will ultimately make you have better online marketing and budgeting decisions. You're using that full data to optimize your marketing. And this will ultimately lead to increased leads, calls, and sales. So I'm going to dive really quick into an example here of what this call conversion blind spot really looks like for a marketer. This blind spot could actually mean that you're not getting credit and intelligence for up to 50% or more of your conversions. So in this example here, what happens when you don't attribute calls? You're only measuring forms, leads from your forms. So you have 4,400 leads from your web form fills. It's driving just under $400,000 in revenue. You have your total budget, which brings you to a cost per lead of $260. And that's actually negative ROI for this campaign. So chances are you might scrap this campaign because it doesn't look like it's very successful, right? Well, what happens when you add calls to that mix? So when you're able to add calls to your attribution mix, you're going to be able to see, again, that true number of conversions that you're driving. So in this case, you're driving 6,200, just over 6,200 leads, phone leads, which is driving additional revenue. It's actually bringing you to your true CPL. And that true CPL there of $108, that is over 100% less, over 50% less than your, if you were just measuring form fills. So your true ROI is actually quite good, and you were ready to scrap this campaign when you were only measuring form fills. So you see this blind spot that is influencing not only your ROI numbers, but it's influencing how you're going to optimize your future marketing campaigns and decisions. So once you do begin to track and analyze your call conversions, there really is a wealth of data that you can get from calls that's going to benefit your team. So first and foremost, what drove the call? We talked about this. It's understanding the marketing channel that the call came from. Was it from a display ad? Was it from a search ad? And if it was from a search ad, you can even know the specific keyword that someone searched for before they landed on your website and called. Maybe you want to understand what pages of your website are converting at a higher rate than other pages. And you can understand the path that someone took through your website before they ultimately converted by calling. You get more information on the call and the caller specifically, so you can understand the geographic location that they called from. You can understand the day and time of the call, and this can all help inform not only your marketing decisions, but additional, even like staffing level decisions to understand when you're getting certain call volumes and from where, and as well as you get more information on the actual conversation. So which agent is taking this call? How long was the call? What was specifically spoken about on the call? Things like that can help you optimize your future marketing campaigns and decisions. So now specifically about SourceTrak, which is Dialog Tech's call attribution technology, there's 3 key benefits. Again, talking about attribution, it's lowering CPL, it's being able to integrate with different marketing technology platforms such as bid management platforms, and getting that really deep level of tracking. It's being able to improve your ROI, and you can integrate this. You can integrate call data with your CRM system and really be able to track a caller all the way through to revenue and understand how those conversions are converting to revenue. And it's getting deeper insights. So again, I talked about the customer journey, but it's really important to understand exactly where calls are occurring in the customer journey and the role that they play in your specific business's customer journey and path to purchase. And some key differentiators. Nick will be touching on a few of these in the next section, but SourceTrak, our technology helps, is a lot more cost efficient for marketers who are doing call attribution, and it's much easier to scale at a higher rate. And the level of data integrity we have is really strong because of how we clean our phone numbers and use our cookie. And further, even more better, is the ease of implementation. So it doesn't require an IT department to implement. It's incredibly easy for any marketer to do themselves. And also, you get it to maintain your NAP consistency, so your name, address, place, so there's no negative impact on SEO either. So now I'm going to hand it off to Nick, and he is going to dive into 6 ways that you can use SourceTrak that you might not have known how to do, and that's some additional call attribution benefits.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Catherine. So yeah, we'll go through 6 topics here today. Some of them are relatively technical, some of them are not. So feel free to post any questions into the webinar or let us know if you need any further detail, but we'll cover a good amount of information here. So the first section we're going to take a look at is going beyond one-to-one tracking and using DNI. DNI is dynamic number insertion. When we talk about call tracking, it's important to understand how you can track calls, the different levels of granularity at which you can track calls, and how you implement that call tracking, right? And so we've broken it up into 3 sections here. Static one-to-one, dynamic one-to-one, and then dynamic session level. So really there's 2 pieces there, whether it's static and whether it's session level. So when we talk about static phone numbers, it really means they're not rotating on a website, right? That doesn't mean you can't use that phone number on a website, but it's not rotating as somebody lands on your website. So a static one-to-one phone number, we say one-to-one because there's a one-to-one relationship between that phone number and what you're tracking. That might be a campaign, it might be a billboard, it might be more granular than that, but really the relationship is one-to-one between that phone number and the source. A dynamic one-to-one is a very similar idea, right? We're creating a one-to-one relationship between a phone number and a source, or a phone number and a campaign, but in this case we are rotating it dynamically on a website using JavaScript implemented through your tag manager. Very easy to do, as Catherine already mentioned. So a dynamic one-to-one allows you to take visitors to maybe the same landing page or to the same website and split them up based on their source. But we still maintain that one-to-one relationship between the source and the call. Now, dynamic session level tracking, this is where you really open up a really rich source of data. The dynamic session level tracking, what we're doing in this case is we're still rotating that phone number dynamically on a website, but we're dedicating phone numbers down to the visitor level. So by creating a unique relationship between a visitor and a phone number, as opposed to that relationship between a source and a phone number, we can really take anything from the browser, anything from their referring data, and associate it with that phone call. So left to right here, kind of increasing levels of data I don't want to say complexity, but in terms of detail, type of data you're able to gather. So let's walk through that data here. So the static one-to-one, again, really what you're getting here is a call count based on how you've dedicated that phone number. You're going to get our caller metadata, so things like caller ID, timestamp, time of day, and then obviously there are interesting things you can do with call recordings and call analysis from there. But in terms of attribution data, it's that one-to-one relationship between the phone number and the source. When we talk about dynamic one-to-one, it's still that relationship, but we increase the ability to differentiate sources from the same website or the same landing page. So here we're same caller metadata, but you're also picking up some higher level source information, maybe channel level information or campaign level information, but not necessarily keyword or session level information. The dynamic session level tracking is where we open up the really rich media attribution data as well as the website attribution data. So there's two pieces there. Part of it is, where did they land? What page did they call from? We'll actually talk a little bit more about that data point further on. But along with that is, what keyword did they search? What was the raw search query? What was the referring domain? So again, each of these different levels of call tracking giving you richer data along the way. So what can we track dynamically? Really, you can track anything dynamically. Any source that sends traffic to your website, we can use the source information to insert dynamic phone numbers, whether that's organic visitors, paid search, email, organic referrals, or direct visitors. The screenshot here is from the Dialog Tech portal, and you'll see there's one-to-one activities and pooled activities. Pooled activities are those session-level dynamic numbers we just talked about. So with this, know with Dialog Tech, you don't have to track everything one-to-one. You don't have to track everything at the session level. Track things at the session level that provide you granular, valuable data, right? So it's a pretty common use case for us to set up session-level tracking for paid search. You're bidding on keywords. You want to optimize towards phone calls. That's really important data. Now, you may not make really important optimizations based off direct visitors. It doesn't provide as much media attribution or unique of data around that visitor. So let's track them with a one-to-one activity. So a lot of flexibility within Dialog Tech to track the sources you want to track at the level you want to track, and again, the flexibility to track any source that's sending traffic to your website. Our next topic here is custom URL tagging, and it's a good segue because we just took a look at some of those different SourceTrak activities that we can use to trigger phone number replacement on your website. And I just mentioned we can track referring domains, we can track particular URL tags that we've provided to you, or we can track everyone that comes directly. The custom URL tag is another activity, or I like to think of them as triggers, right? Somebody lands on your website, our JavaScript fires, and something's got to trigger that phone number to replace. The custom URL tag is another one of those triggers, and really what it allows us to do is piggyback on URL parameters that already exist in your URLs. And we hear it all the time. No marketer loves tagging URLs. I've never given someone some URL tags and they say, "Thank you, Nick. I was really hoping to tag URLs today." So with that, you already tagged your URLs. You already have things in your URLs that indicate the source, the campaign. And that's really the point of this activity here, is to utilize that tagging you're already doing today for your Google Analytics implementation or anything else you might be tracking through. With custom URL tagging, I think there's two benefits. One is operational and the other is analytical. We'll start out talking about the operational benefits, and this really goes back to nobody likes tagging, right? Nobody wants to go back and update their URLs. There might be a typo, you break all your ads. No fun. So the operational benefit of the URL tagging is taking those parameters you use today to differentiate the source of visitors and using them to trigger particular pools on the Dialog Tech side. And so in this case, I use UTM parameters, pretty pervasive throughout web analytics tracking. A lot of folks on the phone probably use these UTMs today. But if I have a UTM source of Google and a UTM source of Bing, and I want to create two separate session-level tracking pools for those two different sources, well, let's just use the parameters you already have today. So in this case, that's where we're using those UTMs, tying them to particular tracking pools, and using URL parameters that already exist within your URLs. The next is analytical. So there's a lot of rich data within those URL parameters, things you're already using to track those folks. And it's often useful to see that same data within dialog text reporting. You want to know what keyword drove a phone call, but you also may want to know what campaign drove a phone call. A lot of folks will use fairly complex campaign tags on their URLs. Sometimes it's a single campaign code that has a lot of information concatenated into it. It's got the campaign, the channel, the keyword, maybe a campaign code that's proprietary to your company. So you're smashing a lot of information into a single parameter. Well, with these custom URL tags, you can kind of go through the thought process, right? I have 2,000 unique campaign tags. How could I ever upload those all in the dialog tag? The idea with this wildcard approach, and you'll see in the small screenshot here that campaign equals SEM underscore asterisk. That asterisk is basically a fill-in-the-blank value within the URL parameter. I think this example will drive that home pretty well. So let's say you have a campaign code in your URL that's a concatenation of a few different pieces. In this case, you have channel, engine, campaign, and then a campaign code. And so as that's spelled out in a URL, you may see SEM, Google, non-brand, campaign 123. The wildcard portion of that tag, after that SEM portion that we looked at, that's where we can start to fill in the blank, right? So I want to rotate a phone number. Think about the operational benefit. I want to rotate a phone number anytime I see SEM in a tag, but I don't want to account for every SEM tag. Well, what this wildcard allows you to do is fill in the blank. So this reporting example here, the activity keyword, that's our trigger. That's what triggered the phone number to replace. And all we had to see was campaign equals SEM to know that this user needs a phone number. We want to track them at a session level. In the URL tag column, that's where we filled in the blank. So bringing in additional data, we're able to know, yeah, they were an SEM visitor, but now you have exactly all of the same campaign tags that you're looking at in your bid management system, you're looking at in web analytics, you're using in a SQL database to do revenue ties. Wherever you might be using that data, now you have that matched with your phone calls as well. And that gives you the ability to, again, report on your phone calls using the data and using the campaign codes that you already use today. Don't reinvent the wheel. So quick summary on URL tagging. They're another activity, so another trigger that you can use. They make your life easier so you don't have to go back and tag URLs, but they also allow you to capture some really rich data within Dialog Tech reporting. So dynamic number insertion. A lot of times and a lot of websites have a single phone number on the website, and you'll rotate that and you'll track folks to your website using that dynamic number insertion. But what happens if I have multiple phone numbers on my website and they're unique? That's when you start to use multi-location tracking through Dialog Tech. We call it multi-location. It's very often used for clients that have many franchises or many locations on their website. But really what it's used for is multiple unique phone number tracking, which isn't as short and clean as multi-location, as you can tell. But the idea being is maybe it's my Chicago location, my LA location, and my New York location. But it might be my sales number, my service number, and my parts number if we're talking about an automotive client. If we're talking about insurance, it might be new members versus existing members. Different ways you split up call flows within your website. And the important part with multi-location tracking is it allows us to make sure that the phone number we insert always routes back to the location you want to reach, right? So you're not getting your wires crossed in terms of where the call routes, and you're not creating black holes in your data. Really the major point of this section right here is that you don't have to leave your locations alone. There's no reason that these local phone numbers on your website need to be a hole in your data. Why use it? Our data shows time and time again that people call local phone numbers. So a short case study we did with an automotive service client on our platform. Their website is familiar. It's got a large call center phone number at the top of the website, really prominent, call here, get help now, and we found that 80% of callers are ignoring the call center phone number. People want to call local businesses and reach a local business. And so with the call center number, I might go through an IVR, I might get to a call center. Really, I want to talk to the local Sylvan Center. I want to talk to my local car dealership. I want to talk to the business that's a mile away from me, not the call center that's 200 miles away from me. You wouldn't track only your form fills for national clients, so why would you only track call center phone calls? So the idea here is don't leave holes in your attribution data because it seems difficult, because it's really not. Dialog Tech's SourceTrak application is uniquely built to make these types of configurations really easy to do. That configuration is available within the Dialog Tech portal. For those of you who get in, do your own clicking within Dialog Tech, we commend you. We love that you're using our platform. This is something we'll set up for you too. So as you start to look at this and think, man, I don't know if I can set that up, we're here to do that for you. Get in touch with your account manager, your implementation manager, and we'll help you out. Within the portal, though, it's really as easy as setting up SourceTrak for one phone number. Really all you're doing is setting up additional tools for additional find and replace phone numbers. And so through the interface, we can easily manage these phone numbers. If a location changes their phone number, you can log in, change that. And you have flexibility around those locations as well. So we talked about earlier, maybe I want to track paid search at the session level, but direct at a one-to-one level. Well, you can get specific all the way down to individual locations. Maybe I want to track paid search calls to my individual locations. I don't want to track direct visitors to my individual locations. We can use the Dialog Tech interface to really parse out that traffic the way that it's valuable to you and make sure that, again, when people call, the phone number they call always routes back to the location it was intended to. And we're able to insert like phone numbers as well. So if it's a 312 phone number, it's a Chicago location, we're going to insert a Chicago phone number, make sure it looks and feels like a local business. So we've talked a lot about different ways that we can get richer data for our different locations. We talked about URL tagging, which allows us to bring in richer campaign data. This next section, it is about data. It is about ensuring that you continue to capture data. What it's really about, though, is implementation. So when we implement Dialog Tech and dynamic number insertion, for those of you who have gone through this, you're familiar with the process. For those who haven't, we're obviously going to hold your hand through it. But we'll deliver to you a piece of JavaScript. You put that JavaScript on your page. Maybe you plug it into a tag manager. And what that JavaScript does is that as they land on the page, we're going to go ahead and rotate any phone numbers that are available. What we're also doing as people navigate around your website is we're logging their page hits. Logging the page hits is really important because one data point that you can receive from Dialog Tech is the page on which they called, that conversion page. So as we start to stitch together that data, it's important not only that we know where they came from, it's also important that we know what they did on your website, and as they travel through your website, that we're rotating phone numbers everywhere that we need to. This section focuses around additional JavaScript functions. So these are functions you can use in conjunction with our JavaScript snippet that can be implemented through Tag Manager or implemented directly on the page to accomplish phone number replacement or page hit logging in situations where the normal JavaScript may not accommodate that. The first example here is using our ST render, and I know that's very code looking. It's probably pretty intimidating to a lot of folks. I don't code, so it's just as intimidating to me. But the idea here is that it's another function you can use to rotate phone numbers that are hard to rotate. I'd say the most common use case for phone numbers that are hard to locate are phone numbers that return to a page or populate on a page without a full page load. For those who are a little more technically oriented, our JavaScript rotates any phone number that's available at DOM ready. But there are phone numbers that pop up on a website after page load. Often it's icons on a map, right? You've got a Google Maps plugin. They're able to access your different locations. Here we see a location within Toronto. They click that map icon and a phone number pops up. But that phone number wasn't there on page load. We may not have rotated it with our initial JavaScript fire. So what the ST render function allows us to do is rotate that phone number. When that information is returned to the page, you can call ST render to rotate that phone number, which is important to eliminate holes in your attribution data. I think more than anything, the message with a lot of what we're talking about here is don't assume you can't do it. We have the tools to do it, and this ST-render is another really good example of a tool that we have to do it, is if you're having a hard time getting a phone number to rotate, please let us know. We have the tools, we have the expertise to make sure that you can get it to rotate. The technical implementation here, you can accomplish this through front-end coding if you'd like. I see most often people using these functions within their tag manager. So you can use a tag manager to listen for different events on the website. I know that we returned phone number data. I know that they clicked on a map icon. You go ahead, you call that ST-render function, and we rotate that phone number just as we would a phone number that's hard-coded on the page. The next one is ST-trigger-page-hit. ST-trigger-page-hit is another JavaScript function that we can use to accommodate different types of websites. I would say most often trigger-page-hit is going to be used for single-page apps. And we see a lot of single-page apps, especially with folks moving to responsive websites, accommodating a lot of the things that Google is asking you to accommodate, is we see more and more people are structuring their websites in a way that you can change pages, but you're not causing a page load. You might be changing that URL with Ajax or with JavaScript, but when they change pages, we don't get a chance to fire again. Our JavaScript that fires on DOM ready doesn't get a chance to fire again. This function also really ties back to conversion page. I always think conversion page is one of the coolest data points we provide because it's really hard to get to in a website analytics tool. For those of you unfamiliar with what a conversion page is, it's the page they were looking at when they called. And to get that data point, it's really important that we know what page they were looking at. Now, if they're changing pages and we don't know they're changing pages, that's when we start to lose that. And so again, conversion page is going to be a match between the page hit that came immediately before the phone call. They're timestamps, right? We know the timestamp of your page hits. We know the timestamp of your phone calls. But again, important we get the timestamp of your page hit. So ST-trigger-page-hit is another function that you can call very similarly to ST-render. You can do so through front-end coding, or you can do so through a tag manager. And what it's going to do is when you change URLs, we'll register that page hit without rendering the entire JavaScript snippet. So again, changing URLs through Ajax, single-page apps, Angular implementations, this is where you're going to start to use this ST-trigger-page-hit, and has become, again, kind of with where websites are heading, this is something I've helped folks implement several times just in the last month. So a lot of our largest enterprise clients use this on their websites, and really is a solution for anyone who's having trouble changing phone numbers, tracking page hits as they move around your website. This last slide just drives that home, and these are shots from our interface here. One of them is our visitor timeline report. This is a look at what we're doing with that page hit logging, right? So they came in on very long URL, has all of our tracking parameters in it. They navigated to another page, and they ultimately called. And you can see where that green call box is immediately after our page hit. That's where we can tie that together, right? And that's where it's important to get that last touch, conversion date or conversion page data point within Dialog Tech. Lets you know which pages on your website are causing people to call. Might be a good thing if you're trying to drive phone calls. Might be a bad thing if you're trying to keep them within an online conversion form. So just the data there to make those decisions. Understanding in-session versus out-of-session phone calls. For this, it's important to understand what exactly we mean by a session when we talk about Dialog Tech and the way that we dedicate phone numbers. So we talked earlier about session-level call tracking, right? That's where everybody on your website at any given time gets a phone number that's unique to them. The way that Dialog Tech serves up that phone number and continues to serve up that phone number is unique, and it's really one of our differentiators. It's called a heartbeat technology. What it allows us to do is continually ping their browser, continually ping their IP to see if they're live on your website. This allows us to serve a phone number for only as long as they need a phone number. The way that we used to do this call tracking, you'll see some call attribution providers do this tracking, is a static window, right? You get a phone number for 12 hours. Well, you can go through the mental math of if every visitor on my website got a phone number for 12 hours, it's going to require a great deal of phone numbers. With the heartbeat technology, that's how we get much more efficient with our phone numbers. Diagram here takes you through that process. So somebody lands on your website, JavaScript fires, phone number inserts. We've cookied them with that phone number. That's their phone number. But we only want to serve that phone number for as long as they're on the website. So we're continually getting that heartbeat back from the browser. We know they're still on your website. We know we should still hold that phone number for them. Once they leave the website, the heartbeat ends. The heartbeat dies. We no longer know that they're on your website. What Dialog Tech then does is takes that phone number and it puts it into a 10-minute cooldown period. So we're not going to immediately serve that phone number to another visitor. And further, if the visitor who just left your website returns, we're able to serve them up the exact same phone number as well. So we put that into a 10-minute cooldown period. Once that cooldown period expires, that phone number becomes available to other users. The phone number is no longer necessarily unique to the user who is just viewing it. Why is this important? Why are we talking about this? What does this have to do with your data? When we talk about out-of-session calls, and really an out-of-session call is going to be a call that comes in that last section there. Somebody who was no longer being served a phone number, but a call came in through that phone number. One data point that you'll find within Dialog Tech's platform is ST rank. What is ST rank or SourceTrak rank? SourceTrak rank is really a confidence indicator for that attribution data. Right? There's a very concrete tie between a phone number that's being served to somebody actively and a phone call that comes in through that phone number. We know that they were both looking at a phone number and they called the phone number. And that's number one. Number one, our highest rank is we know that they were looking at the phone number when they called it. They at least had their browser open with that website. So that's our most confident use case. We know they were viewing the phone number. We know they called the phone number. The chances that that was somebody else calling that phone number or that they didn't intend to call that phone number are pretty slim. Number two is that they were in the cooldown period when they called. Number three is past that cooldown period. So let's take a look at the same diagram but with those ranks overlaid. We talked about number one. Number one, our most confident indicator. They were looking at a phone number, they called, the heartbeat was live, they were live on your website. Number two, that's within that 10-minute cooldown period. And so we're a little bit less confident about that attribution. We know that the phone number wasn't displayed to anyone else because it was in the 10-minute cooldown period, but we also know that visitor wasn't on your website. So there's a good chance they wrote it down. Maybe they had it plugged into their phone. They clicked dial after they left the website, called shortly afterwards. So slightly less confident than number one, obviously slightly more confident than number three. Number three are users who come in, or phone calls that come in while a phone number is not being actively served to anyone and was not actively served to anyone in the last 10 minutes. With Dialog Tech's call attribution, a phone number holds on to its attribution until it's served again. And so we know with a fair amount of confidence that when a phone number comes in through this phone number, it's very likely the person who viewed it last, but we can't be 100% certain. That's why it's a slightly lower confidence. But we do know that the call came in from somebody, the example here would be I wrote a phone number down. I know I want to call a business. I just don't have time right now, but I grabbed the phone number from the website. So I wrote it down. I left the website. I called back 2 hours later. That's still important attribution data to get. You don't want to create a hole in your attribution by ignoring folks who write down phone numbers. But again, the confidence data here is richer data for you to gauge, was it almost certainly tied to that keyword? Are we less confident that it was tied to that keyword? The overall message here is that Dialog Tech SourceTrak is a very accurate attribution platform, but we also want to make sure we're transparent about the confidence we have around that attribution. So this data point here is one more that's available within Dialog Tech you can use to model your data and start to get a deeper understanding of your attribution. Last but not least, we'll talk about cross-domain and subdomain tracking. I know a lot of you folks on the phone are already familiar with what it means to be cross-domain and cross-subdomain, but we want to give a quick refresher just to be sure. Cross-domain tracking is truly crossing domains, and so domain 1 and domain 2 here are a good example. These are two different websites. Now, with DialogTech cross-domain tracking, what we would be doing is tracking them to domain 1, domain 2, and then through to the phone call. Subdomains are typically portions of a single website, right? So very often we see folks put their SEM landing pages on a subdomain. I'd say that's the #1 use case we see. I also see a lot of folks putting their store locator on a subdomain, or maybe their careers page on a subdomain is pretty common to see. And so subdomain tracking, we're still on domain 1. We're tracking them from landing page to locator and then through to the phone call. Within Dialog Tech, setting up cross-domain tracking is very easy. For those of you who have worked in our interface before, you know that you need to whitelist domains for our JavaScript. You can implement our JavaScript wherever you want. It's not going to do anything until you whitelist that domain within your Dialog Tech account. Whitelisting just meaning allow this script to run on that website. With cross-domain tracking, it's really just a matter of giving our script permission to run on two different domains. Once you give it permission to run on two different domains, as they cross domains, we all have a persistent cookie on that visitor, so we'll track them as they cross domains. With subdomains, same idea. Plug in your different subdomains, configure them within SourceTrak. We'll track them as they go from landing page to locator to the careers page, whatever different landing page or subdomains you may have. One thing we also run into, and we'll come back to that idea of a wildcard. You see an asterisk in front of that domain 1. That's the wildcard again. It means the same thing as it did in that custom URL tag. So you remember with custom URL tagging, we used a wildcard as a fill in the blank, right? We want to see SEM underscore, anything after that, fill in the blank. It's the same idea with whitelisting subdomains. Some use cases we run into are folks with extremely complex subdomain structures. Some websites will spin up a subdomain for every unique geo, right? So chicago.dialogtech.com, Los Angeles.dialogtech.com, and nobody wants to plug all of those into their SourceTrak set. So what the wildcard allows you to do is allow for any subdomain on your domain. This is also really useful because you don't have to, it's set and forget, right? And so if you set up a wildcarded subdomain, and your SEM agency comes back to you and they say, man, we really got to put your landing pages on a subdomain, and you forget to check Dialog Tech, you're fine. You're covered. We're already accounting for those subdomains. So why would I or why wouldn't I use cross-domain and cross-subdomain tracking? My rule of thumb, and when I'm working with customers on this, I always say this, is that if you don't do cross-domain tracking in your website analytics platform, so if you don't have cross-domain profiles in Google Analytics, you're not doing cross-domain tracking in Adobe Analytics, I don't see any reason for you to do cross-domain call tracking. In those cases, you're creating conflicting attribution models, right? If you want to track that someone came from a paid search ad, reached domain 1, reach domain 2 and called, and you want to track that back to that paid search ad, that's where you want to do cross-domain tracking. Now really if the credit you want to give is that referral from the other website, that's where you don't want to do cross-domain tracking. This is really important for integrating as well, and that's why I always use the website analytics example. Google Analytics is by far our most common website analytics integration. I'm sure a lot of folks on the phone today are integrated with Google Analytics. With our setup, functionally, it's not going to make sense to do it cross-domain in our setup and not cross-domain within Google Analytics. Cross-subdomain tracking, I rarely run into use cases where it doesn't make sense to track cross-subdomains. You may not want to track people who reach your main domain from your landing pages. It's a totally valid use case, but I don't see it a lot. So my approach to subdomain tracking, if people do have SEM landing pages on a subdomain, it's let's track them cross-domain. Now you might be thinking, I'm only tracking my SEM, why do I need to enter in my main domain? Well, usually without fail, and enough people know this at this point, if I click the logo in the upper left-hand corner, I'm going to get to your main domain from your honeypot landing page. So in that case, why lose them when they find a way to get to your main domain? Let's track them all the way through. So with cross-subdomain tracking, again, I say do it unless you have a really good reason not to, and if you have a really complex subdomain structure, know that Dialog Tech will easily accommodate that as well.
All right, thanks, Nick. That was a lot of really good information. I hope everybody enjoyed that. Just really quick, I mean, you can see the value of calls and everything that SourceTrak can help you do. Ultimately, at Dialog Tech, we really want to help marketers expand the customer engagement that they can optimize. I talked about this in the customer journey. Calls are a very, very important customer engagement. And at the end of the day, our Voice 360 platform goes way beyond just call attribution analytics. There's a lot of other technology we help with call routing, spam prevention. Conversation Insight gives you that insight into the conversations that people are having with your agents and your sales reps. And then the integrations level piece. You can integrate into a number of your existing marketing technology tools that you're already using. So that's it for us right now. We've had a few questions come in, so we can answer those real quick. Please submit any more in the chat box if you have them right now. Our next I Can Do That Dialog Tech webinar is going to be on March 16th, and we're going to be covering more of those data integrations and kind of unique ways you can integrate call data into your marketing tools. So without further ado, let's see what questions we have here. We had one come in from somebody, and they asked that it seems like this system would be most useful with large amounts of hits to a website. Should this system only be implemented once the website has that level of usage? Nick, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, SourceTrak scales up and down from, we have clients running SourceTrak with 100 visitors a month. We have clients running SourceTrak with 6 million visitors a month. I think you should run SourceTrak as soon as you set up your website, obviously. But I think with that, we can just use very few phone numbers, right? So we can set up relatively small tracking pools to still get you really valuable data. And I think our data is pretty valuable for increasing traffic to your website. So as you're digging in on analytics, how people convert, where they're coming from, I think it's really valuable to have that data. So no, we really have clients on SourceTrak that run the gamut from folks who use 2-number pools to track, the couple hundred visitors they have trickling in, to again, some of the largest automotive and insurance companies in the US where we're tracking millions and millions of visitors a day.
Yeah, it really goes back to kind of thinking about your business and if calls are going to be valuable if you're receiving them and using that to optimize to what Nick said, to drive more calls and drive more hits to your website and traffic. Another one here, I had mentioned no negative impact on SEO, so this person had a question about how does that exactly work? How do you get no negative impact to your SEO? I know that's a big concern that a lot of people have.
Absolutely, and a lot of that comes down to NAP consistency, right? I can't be playing with a phone number on my website. Google doesn't like that, and Google is king, right? With Dialog Tech's SourceTrak, what we do is a phone number find and replace. And what that means is that you leave the phone number on your website, or in other words, the phone number that Google's bots can see exactly the same as it's always been. And what we'll do is rotate phone numbers in on top of that. That's especially important when we talk about that multi-location tracking, and that's where we hear a lot of that concern, is I can't be masking phone numbers for my locations, it doesn't match my Google My Business account, I'm going to get dinged in my organic rank. The short answer is no, you won't. We'll always be a layer on top. Google is never going to see that we are changing phone numbers on your website, and so long story short, not going to impact your organic rank or your SEO practice.
That kind of segues into the next one with the multi-location. I think this question came in during that section, is with the multi-location, are there ways to control how my calls are routed if I don't have multiple locations listed, or if it's a call coming in for the main number?
Yeah, I think that's a perfect question. So with multi-location tracking, we want to give them the ability to call local phone numbers, right? But if the toll-free is most prominent and we want to get them to local businesses, running them through a call center agent might not be the most efficient way to do that. You might want a warm transfer, but really the best way to treat a customer is to get them where they want to go. Dialog Tech has a host of routing applications far beyond all of the attribution applications we talked about today. So zip code routing, geographic routing. We have webhook-enabled IVRs. We can interact with the database on your side to route them completely uniquely based on inputs that you want from the customer. And so that gives you the ability to let them call the 800 number, the main toll-free number, but route them very seamlessly to the location that they should be speaking to.
Great, thank you. And this person said that they have a few international locations actually. Does dynamic number insertion, can it be used for the same way for international phone numbers?
Yes, absolutely. So Dialog Tech has gone international. That was a large initiative for us over the past couple of years. But yeah, the international SourceTrak, it works the same as any other SourceTrak. Obviously, we're looking for phone numbers that look differently. We're inserting phone numbers that are different. But we have international carriers that support those phone calls, and SourceTrak has been adapted to accommodate different phone numbers, obviously with country codes and the different structures you see with international clients.
And we just had one other question come in asking, is there any way to collect keyword data from call extension calls on Google? It's a great question.
It's probably a whole different webinar, but yes, absolutely. So Dialog Tech does a call extensions tracking application. With keyword level for call extensions, that's data that is available within AdWords as long as you're using that Google forwarding number. With our application, we open up a lot richer data set around those phone calls, giving you access to the caller ID, the recordings, some call routing along with that. So really our call extensions application is a complement to the data that you can receive through AdWords today, but short answer is yes, absolutely, we can do keyword tracking through call extensions.
All right, I think that looks like it's it. Thank you everybody so much for joining. Again, we will be sending out a recording of this webinar, so keep an eye out for your email inbox. And we hope to see you next month in our March webinar on the next episode of the series. Thank you so much.